Hello, and thank you for joining Live Derry for today's analysis of this morning's The Nolan Show on Thursday, the 22nd of February 2024. On today's show, Nolan took a swing at striking bus drivers and pretended not to know that if they were to strike, continue to run the buses, and not take payment, that they would be liable for those costs. He also pretended not to know that those laws could be changed by Stormont to allow strikers to continue to provide services to the public and simply go on a pay strike where they wouldn't take any fees for the bosses. Then Nolan moved on to raising some hysteria around the funding for Casement Park. And in his final segment, the Revenge segment, Nolan brought Jim Alister onto the show so that they could both take some swings at Jeffrey Donaldson in revenge for the interview Nolan did with Jeffrey Donaldson at the start of February. In that interview, Jeffrey Donaldson absolutely eviscerated Nolan. You can watch the full interview on BBC Sounds, or you can watch a clip on Live Derry. So we will jump straight into the revenge segment, the fun segment, and see what's happening with the strange goings-on around the threats that Jeffrey Donaldson received for going back into Stormont. I'll be right back with you after Nolan introduces the premise of this segment.
Let's come back to our top story today. It's Brendan Hughes' story, our political reporter here at the BBC. It is that the DUP has told Brendan Hughes that it was Sir Jeffrey Donaldson's decision not to press charges, despite the fact that the PSNI have said that they did not detect any criminality after they investigated threats made against Sir Jeffrey Donaldson. So how can that be? How can a political leader decide whether to press charges if there has been no criminal activity?
So just to note what Nolan has said there, the DUP have claimed that Jeffrey Donaldson chose not to press charges against those people who threatened him. There was also an investigation by the PSNI, which means that it was reported, so it was serious enough to report. And the PSNI found that there was no criminal threshold met in order to consider that a viable or criminal threat. So, how did Jeffrey Donaldson choose not to press charges when there was no criminal threshold met? So we'll continue on and see what Nolan and Jim Alister make of this, and I'll get right back with you.
Let's remind ourselves of how Jeffrey Donaldson, Sir Jeffrey, so passionately described the threats that had been made about him in a speech in the House of Commons.
The truth is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are some, a tiny minority, but there are some who don't want Stormont back, who don't want an assembly in Northern Ireland, who, and I quote, would rather have imperfect direct rule than an imperfect Stormont. That is what they say. And yet they're the same people who berate the government of the United Kingdom and this Parliament for selling them out constantly, who constantly point the finger at the United Kingdom government and say, you've sold us short, you betrayed us, you've let us down, and yet they want to hand all the power back to that government. That is not the view of the vast majority of Unionists.
So another point worth noting there, whenever Jeffrey Donaldson said and quotes those people who said that they'd rather have an imperfect direct rule than a perfect Stormont, those people that he claims were saying they've been sold out by the British government are very clear to all of us. I'm sure very clear to anyone that follows any of Northern Ireland politics that he was definitely referring to the likes of Jamie Bryson and Jim McAllister. So just to get back to it now.
Or people in Northern Ireland. And we understand that, which is why we are committed to getting a solution to moving things forward, to making progress, to resolving the issues that have harmed Northern Ireland, our economy, our businesses, and yes, our place in the United Kingdom. I am a proud Unionist. I am proud to be part of this United Kingdom. I am proud to have served my country in this Parliament for almost 27 years. I'm proud of the service that I've given, unlike some others, to my country when I put on the uniform of the Ulster Defence Regiment to protect everyone in the community from terrorism and violence. And yet today, because of the stirring up that is going on, I was threatened. Threatened. By those who never put on a uniform. By those who haven't served our country.
Just to jump in there again. Now, obviously, the threat was investigated by the PSNI, so Sir Jeffrey Donaldson felt it was serious enough to report, and with the passion and vigour he spoke just now, saying threatened, threatened, I would imagine it wasn't a threat to bar him from the local chip shop, or a threat to not vote for him in the future. It's very clear that he's insinuating that there was a serious threat of violence. So let's get back to see. I think now Big Jim's going to have a chat and say what he thinks about it. So let's get to it.
Well, the leader of the TUP has called on Sir Jeffrey Donaldson to now make an apology. Jim Alister. Why, Jim?
Well, because it's quite clear that when Sir Jeffrey made the allegation of having been threatened, he couched it in terms to try and create guilt by association with those of us who were opposing his sellout on the protocol. There was a very deliberate attempt to blacken us in the same breath as he made that allegation. Now it turns out there was no threat. That the police have found there is nothing that sustains a criminal threat.
No, it does not. No, it does. It does not turn out that there was no threat. Absolutely, it does not.
Sorry, it turns out.
It turns out there was no threat that the PSNI believe met the criminal threshold. Two different things.
In other words, there was no breach of criminal law. There was no threat such as described.
You can threaten someone without it being a criminal act.
Yes, I think it's quite clear that Sir Jeffrey was indicating that the threat he was talking about was a criminal act. I think that's abundantly clear, and that was an attempt to create smear by association.
Now, it's very obvious that here Nolan knows exactly what Sir Jeffrey was intonating, and he's just giving his good friend Jim Alister the opportunity to take a few extra digs to emphasise that there is no grey area here, that Sir Jeffrey was definitely talking about Jim and Jamie, and that he was definitely insinuating that he'd received physical threats. So let's have a look. And when I say talking about and receive, he was talking about them creating an atmosphere that meant that Jeffrey would receive threats, not that they had anything to do with the threats themselves. Just to be clear. So let's get back and have a listen.
And now that that's been found not to be true, then Sir Jeffrey, he needs to man up. It's not just that at best he looks foolish this morning. He needs to man up and withdraw that deliberate swear on those he was trying to blacken.
So there you have it. And before I wrap up, that's a bit of a strange turn of phrase. I think he means, besmirch or, sully their reputation. I don't know about how right it is to be using that term derogatively. Maybe it's completely innocuous and I'm being oversensitive. Perfectly possible. So please share, comment. It really does matter to small channels. We want to make more of these, and the more likes and shares we get, the more likely it is we'll be able to. So thank you very much again for watching. Please follow Live Derry across all of the socials. Thank you.
It's not just that he looks foolish this morning. He needs to man up and withdraw that deliberate swear.